Okay, now that we know some information's at the back of the head, some information's at the top of the head, the information at the top of the head is easy to access from memory. The information at the back of the head is harder to access from memory. So armed with that information, I want you to go ahead and I want you to go ahead and if you look on your lecture notes, it says individuals take a random sample. I want you to go ahead and click on that thing. And if you click on that thing, what you're going to see is actually, of all things, you're going to see a picture of Homer Simpson. So I want you to go ahead and click on that and make sure that you have that thing available to you. I'm going to click on it at the same time so I have mine available to me. And we're going to talk about the memory-based information processing model and how it actually works. Now, I want you to imagine that what you have is a public opinion poll, and somebody calls up and says, do you approve or disapprove of the job the president is doing? It can be President Obama, President Bush, it doesn't make any difference. Here's what the memory-based information processing model, this is how it describes how we answer survey questions. First, when an individual answers a survey question, what they don't do is they don't search everything that they have stored in memory. Like, take a look at the picture of Homer over there, the x-ray of Homer, right? The way that picture is supposed to look, if you see at the top of his head, he's got some pluses and minuses, right? He's got some pluses. Those pluses mean that he likes let's do it to President Obama. He likes President Obama. And then the minuses are things that are attitudes where he doesn't like President Obama. So the pluses might be that he likes the healthcare thing. The minus might be that he doesn't think that the takeover of the auto industry was a good idea. But if you look at the top of his head, mostly what he has are positive things at the top of his head. And if you look on the right-hand corner of the picture, what you can see is at the top of his head, he has 13 positive things and 3 negative things. And then if you look at the back of his head, right, again, he's got more positive things than he does negative things. If you look in the lower right-hand corner, you can see he has 14 positive things in the back of his head and only 4 negative things in the back of his head. Now, suppose Homer is sitting at home and Pollster calls up and they say, we'd like to ask you a question. And he's like, sure. And I'm not doing a Homer Simpson impersonation because I can't. But they ask him, do you approve or disapprove of the job President Obama is doing? Right? Homer is not going to go ahead and try and think about everything he has stored in memory, processing all that information. Why? Because the reality is when somebody asks you a question, like, do you approve or disapprove of the job President Obama is doing, you only have a small amount of time to go ahead and answer. Right? If you think about it, if somebody asks you that question, how long before you have to go ahead and answer the question? Students in class sometimes will say, well, you have about 5 seconds before you have to answer. Turns out 5 seconds is like a really long amount of time. For example, imagine that that I'm getting a phone call, or I'm calling somebody and I'm asking them the question, I'm Phil, I'm doing a poll, do you approve or disapprove of the job President Obama is doing? If it takes them 5 seconds, I'm going to count out 5 seconds before they answer. Is that a normal amount of time? So watch. Do you approve or disapprove of the job President Obama is doing? That is a really long time. I would assume that they hung up, right? We don't have 5 seconds to respond. We have about a second, maybe a second and a half before we have to respond. If you want to buy some time, sometimes you can just go, or if you really want to buy some time, you go ahead and you say, do I approve or disapprove of the job President Obama is doing, right? And you just try and buy some time. But for the most part, you have to answer pretty quickly. Well, according to the memory-based information processing model, here's what people do. Individuals take a random sample of their attitudes. Like, look back at that picture of Homer again. What Homer is going to do is he's going to take a random sample of the attitudes that he has stored in his head. And this is important. He's going to oversample what's at the top of his head. In other words, when he takes a sample, he's just going to randomly select what's at the top of his head, some of those pluses, some of those minuses. And he's going to randomly select some of those pluses and minuses from the back of his head. But he's going to oversample what's at the top of the head. In other words, most of the things that he samples, most of the pluses and minuses that he gathers up are going to be from the top of the head. And then he's going to undersample what's at the back of the head. Because more or less, if you look at it, at the top of the head and the back of the head, he's got slightly more things in the back of the head than the top of the head than he does in the top of the head. But when he does his sample, he's going to grab a bunch of stuff from the top of the head, a little bit of stuff from the back of the head, just selecting them randomly, and then he's going to basically look. And he's going to see, do I have more pluses or minuses? So it's a random sample. He's just going to grab them randomly, like blindly, like picking out. He doesn't know what he's going to get, like sort of putting attitudes into a hat and sort of picking them out randomly. He's going to randomly pick out some attitudes, mostly from the top of the head, not so much from the back of the head. He's going to put them together, and his opinion is going to be based on the attitudes that he samples. So for example, if most of the attitudes are positive, he reaches into his head, mostly from the top of the head, some from the back of the head, he looks and says, oh, look, I have mostly positives. He's going to say, I approve of the job President Obama is doing. If he reaches in and goes ahead and pulls out pluses and minuses randomly, he looks at them and basically most of them are negative, he's going to say, I disapprove of the job President Obama is doing. That's how it works in the memory-based model. We take a random sample of the attitudes stored in our head, mostly from the top of the head, not so much from the back of the head, just some, and then based on that, they're going to go ahead and that's how we give our answers. Now, if you look at Homer, Homer's got way more pluses than minuses, right? Homer's got a whole bunch more pluses than minuses. So if you think about it, if Homer goes ahead and takes a random sample, again, he's just like blindly choosing stuff from the top of the head, blindly choosing stuff from the back of the head, mostly from the top of the head, most of the time, because he's got so many more positive than negative attitudes, most of the time, he's going to say that he approves of the job President Obama is doing. Sometimes, like that, he may actually take a random sample and just randomly select some from the top of the head and the back of the head, and he may wind up with more negatives than positives. Not very often, but it may happen, in which case he would say, I disapprove, right? That's the way it works. So according to the memory-based model, when people answer survey questions, this is what we do. We take a random sample of the attitudes at the top of the head and the back of the head, mostly the top of the head, and then based on what we sample, based on the attitudes that we select, we go ahead and we give our answer. That is how the memory-based model works. Now, if that doesn't make sense, we're going to go over this a couple more times, so you can either play the video back again and see if it makes sense the second time around, or what you can do is just sort of keep along, just go to the next video, and hopefully this will all make more sense. But again, people, according to the memory-based model, people take a random sample of the attitudes they have stored in memory, mostly what's at the top of the head, not so much from the back of the head, and the opinions that they express. Remember, the attitudes are what's in their head. The opinions that they express are based on the attitudes that they select, right? And key point here, everybody goes ahead and does this random sampling thing. Everybody, regardless if we're talking about people with strong views, people with weak views, people who are highly educated, people who aren't educated, Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, everybody answers survey questions the same way, okay? So we're going to end here, and then we'll go on to the next part of this discussion. If it didn't make sense, you can either play back this video, or if you want, go ahead and just keep going to the next video. Maybe you can come back to this, come back to this later on.